Hi, crime enthusiasts. This is your host Ashita, and the story I have for you today is one of the most chilling and bizarre cases to ever come out of Vienna. A popular ice cream parlor, a seemingly sweet shop owner, and beneath it all, a horror frozen in silence. Estibaliz Carranza, forgive my pronunciation, was known for scooping gelato with a smile. But behind the scenes, she was meticulously planning and carrying out two cold blooded murders. Her ex husband, her lover, both shot in the back of the head, dismembered with a chainsaw, and hidden in freezers before being buried in concrete under her own store. Locals call her the Ice Lady. This is not just a story of murder, it's a story of secrets, obsession, and ice cream, served with a side of horror. Estibaliz Carranza wasn't just running a quaint little cafe in Vienna. Behind the counter of her ice cream parlor, Caria, she was living a nightmare of her own making. A nightmare she engineered with chilling precision and carried out with what prosecutors later described as singular cold-bloodedness. Dubbed the Ice Lady by the press, Carranza stood trial for what Austrian media called the trial of the year. But the trial itself was only the final act in a twisted saga that spanned years, involved multiple victims, a dramatic international manhunt, and a web of secrets buried quite literally beneath layers of concrete. The crimes unimaginable. In 2008, she shot her husband, Holger Holz, execution style. 2 years later, she murdered her lover, Manfred Hinterberger, in the exact same calculated fashion. Both men killed at close range with a gunshot to the back of the head. But the murders were only the beginning of her macabre routine. She used a chainsaw to dismember the bodies. The pieces were frozen, wrapped, and later encased in concrete. She mixed the cement herself and entombed their remains in the cellar beneath her ice cream shop, the same place where customers came in day after day, unknowingly standing just above a personal graveyard she had created. And for a time, it worked. No one suspected a thing. Estibaliz went on with her life as though nothing had happened. She served gelato, smiled at customers. She lived upstairs, just feet away from the cement tomb that held her grisly secrets. She even brought a new man into her life. But secrets buried under concrete don't stay hidden forever. In June 2011, maintenance workers entered the cellar to fix a broken pipe. What they discovered was the stuff of nightmares. Body parts sealed into blocks of concrete. The news broke wildfire, and within hours, Estibaliz Carranza was gone. She fled the country, sparking a Europe-wide manhunt. Days later, she was found hiding in northern Italy. When police arrested her, they made another shocking discovery. Estibaliz was 2 months pregnant by yet another man, someone she had met after the murders, and who later became her husband. The two were married while she was behind bars. In January, she gave birth to a baby boy, but the joy was short-lived. Authorities immediately removed the infant from her custody. The child was sent to live with Carranza's parents in Barcelona, where he remains out of the public eye. What followed was a legal and psychological storm. Estibaliz claimed she was driven to murder by emotional abuse, manipulation, and fear. Experts testified about her personality, how she showed signs of a narcissistic and manipulative nature, masked by charm and control. Prosecutors, meanwhile, painted a much darker picture. A woman who meticulously planned the murders, carried them out with methodical precision, and hid the bodies like a seasoned criminal. But even as the evidence piled up, one question echoed louder than the rest. How does a woman go from scooping ice cream to slicing bodies with a chainsaw? To understand how a woman could commit such calculated cold-blooded murders, how she could carve up two men and hide them in concrete beneath her ice cream shop, you have to go back. Back before the murders, before the trial, before the world knew her as the Ice Lady. The story of Estibaliz Carranza begins in 1978 in the sprawling, chaotic heart of Mexico City. Born to a Spanish mother and a Mexican father, Estibaliz grew up in a world full of contradictions. It was a city of rich culture and deep-rooted traditions, but also full of danger, unrest, and secrecy. And her home life mirrored that unsettling balance. Her father, Armando Carranza Mendoza Lopez, wasn't your average parent. He was an intellectual, a writer, and deeply involved in mysticism and ancient belief systems. He studied the historic, the spiritual, and the shamanic rituals of the Incas, Mayas, and Aztecs. His books focused on cosmic forces and forgotten gods. On paper, he was brilliant, but in real life, he was a tyrant. Inside the Carranza household, control and fear reigned. Estibaliz's father was said to be domineering and psychologically abusive. He dictated the emotional temperature of the home. His belief may have seemed fascinating to outsiders, but for a child growing up under his roof, they formed the backdrop of an unstable, authoritarian upbringing. From a very young age, Estibaliz developed disturbing thoughts, not just fears or fantasies, but violent imaginings. She reportedly admitted that she fantasized about killing her father, long before ever she had laid a hand on a weapon. That kind of emotional damage doesn't leave visible scars, but it burrows deep. It lingers and it festers. She learned early how to hide her emotions, how to smile when she needed to, how to read a room, how to please the people who held power over her while quietly nurturing the rage that boiled beneath. She became good at playing roles, and that perhaps more than anything is what one day would allow her to murder with such terrifying calm. Carranza left Mexico and her family's shadow behind when she moved to Europe for school. She graduated with honors from the University of Barcelona, seemingly ready to begin a new life. But the damage from her past didn't stay in Mexico. It traveled with her, quietly, invisibly, like a ghost clinging to her soul. And eventually, it would resurface. Esti, as she came to be known, grew up with rage smoldering just beneath the surface. She despised her controlling father and with a passion that only deepened with time. According to Esti herself, she had long fantasized about killing him, an urge she buried beneath the weight of expectation and obedience. Her father wasn't just domineering, he dictated her future. Under his strict orders, she was forced to study economics at the University of Barcelona. She didn't choose that life, it was chosen for her. And like so many things in her life, her relationships weren't really hers either. During her time in Barcelona, Esti met a man. At first, he seemed like an escape, a way out. They became engaged and stayed together for 5 long years. But that relationship would become its own kind of prison. He treated her not as a partner, but as property. According to reports, he openly referred to her as something he owned and behaved accordingly. Possessive, dismissive, controlling. The same pattern all over again. And like with her father, Esti's dark thoughts began to surface, violent ones, fantasies of murder. This time, directed at the man who was supposed to love her. But fate intervened. As soon as Esti graduated, her fiancé dropped a final betrayal. He admitted he never wanted a serious long-term relationship and just left her, just like that. And ironically, it was his abandonment that saved his life. Now truly free, no father, no fiancé, Esti had shed her past like dead skin. She packed up, disappeared from Spain, and re-emerged in Germany. Her next chapter would unfold in Munich, where she took a quiet job as a babysitter for a family friend. But she was no longer the same girl who played once by the rules. This Esti had learned how to disappear into new places, to adapt quickly, and to stay ahead of anyone who might try to follow her. Unlike her parents, Esti already spoke German. It gave her an edge, linguistic invisibility, and allowed her to slip through the cracks with ease. Once the babysitting job ended, she didn't return home. Instead, she stayed in Germany and found work at an ice cream shop in Nuremberg. And there it was, inside the sugary innocence of that pastel-colored storefront, that she met the man who would become her first victim. His name was Holger Holz, a refrigeration equipment salesman, devout member of the Hare Krishna movement, and a man 14 years her senior. He was eccentric, devoted, and strangely impulsive. After only 1 week of dating, Holger proposed to Esti, and she said yes. In 2002, 24-year-old Esti and 32-year-old Holger were married. They moved to Berlin to start a life together, but almost immediately cracks formed in the facade. According to Esti, Holger's behavior shifted overnight. The man who had once seemed spiritual and calm became paranoid and controlling. He accused her of hiding her income from her job as a waitress. He confiscated her passport and her ID. He isolated her from her past and tries to force her into his world. Psychological abuse, emotional control, even financial domination. Esti claimed he pocketed her earnings, stifled her independence, and pushed her deeper into the Hare Krishna movement until she felt trapped inside a belief system she never chose. But Holger wasn't the only one treating her this way. At another ice cream shop where she picked up work, Esti accused her supervisor of bullying and humiliation, denying her bathroom breaks and belittling her in front of others. The walls were closing in, and Esti's mind, scared by years of emotional imprisonment, turned back to the only fantasy that gave her complete control: murder. Her online search history around this time tells a chilling story. She began researching how to best burn down a business. Her thoughts were no longer just fleeting. They were evolving into something dangerous, something actionable. By 2005, Esti and Holger had moved again, this time to Vienna, Austria. There, they opened their own ice cream parlor, Schleckeria, connected to the apartment they shared. A new start, it seemed, but inside the home, nothing had changed. Holger, according to Esti, continued the psychological torment. He handled most of the money. He became obsessed with guns and violent first-person shooter games. He pushed his religious ideology more forcefully. The power imbalance deepened, and so did Esti's resentment. Then one day, someone new walked into her life. His name was Manfred Hinterberger, a 48-year-old technician who came to install the ice cream machines at Schlickeria. Manfred was everything Holger wasn't: warm, receptive, and available. An affair quickly blossomed. By 2007, Esti had officially divorced Holger, but he didn't move out. He continued living in the same apartment, the same walls, the same toxicity. And then came the breaking point. It was April 27, 2008. Esti returned home after a shift at Schleckeria to find Holger again, berating her, harassing her, shouting. But eventually, he grew tired of the tirade, sat at the computer, and lost himself in one of his games. That's when Esti made her decision. She walked into the room quietly, picked up the couple's .22 caliber Beretta pistol, and fired 3 bullets into the back of Holger's head. He never saw it coming. For days, his corpse sat slumped in the chair as Esti tried to figure out what to do next. At first, she tried burning the body, but realized that the smoke might tip off the neighbors, and it did. The fire department had arrived, responding to the smell and the smoke. But by the time they got there, Esti had doused the flame. She calmly explained that it was just a kitchen mishap, cooking oil gone wrong. Incredibly, they believed her. They left. What they didn't know was that just 2 meters away from the door, Holger's body sat rotting in a chair. If he had been any closer, the story might have ended right there. But instead, it continued. The smell of decomposition was overwhelming. Neighbors began to complain. Some even asked if she was cooking fish. Esti leaned into the light. Yes, she said, she had been experimenting with seafood dishes. Then she vomited. The reality of what she was doing hit her briefly. But she composed herself and returned to the body. She went to a hardware store and bought a chainsaw. By now, Holger's corpse had already started to decompose. The task was gruesome, unimaginable, but Esti pushed through it. Piece by piece, she dismembered the man she had once married. She placed the remains into plastic bags and stored them in a freezer. When anyone asked about Holger, she smiled and said he had moved to India to join the Krishna movement. Eventually, their apartment lease ended. She had to relocate Holger's remains, so she poured concrete into ice cream tubs, incassing the body parts one by one, sealing them like she was trying to forget. Then she called in some friends, unknowing, unsuspecting friends, to help move the freezer into the basement of Schleckeria. There, she placed it into storage, right beneath the feet of her smiling customers. No one ever suspected a thing. Esti had finally fulfilled the first murderous fantasy of her life, and in her mind, she had gotten away with it. With Holger now permanently out of life and hidden in an ice cream tub deep in Schleckeria's basement, Esti wasted no time stepping into a new chapter. This time, with Manfred. No more secrets, no more sneaking around. Their affair, once clandestine, was now open and legitimate. Esti and Manfred, the technician who had helped install Schleckeria's machines, became an official couple. But this too, like all of Esti's relationships, quickly soured beneath the surface. At first, things seemed better. Manfred wasn't nearly as domineering as Holger. He didn't scream or confiscate her ID. He wasn't violently or obsessively religious. But that didn't mean their relationship was healthy. Far from it. According to Esti, Manfred heavily invested his own money into Schleckeria to the point where Esti felt smothered by a new kind of debt. One she could never hope to repay. Worse, Manfred began seeing other women behind her back. His unfaithfulness was no secret. And though he wasn't outwardly abusive like her previous husband, Esti grew more and more unhappy. Still, her grievances against Manfred never rose to the level of Holger's alleged abuse. They still raised questions. Questions that only deepened when one of Esti's ex-boyfriends stepped forward. This former lover, who had never been accused of anything by Esti, described her in a very specific way. He called her submissive, said she would do anything for a man, molding herself into whatever version she thought they wanted. He claimed she tried to be a perfect, a living, breathing fantasy. That same pattern was echoed by nearly all her surviving exes. They described a woman who aimed to please, who adapted entirely to the desires of a man in front of her. Future psychiatric evaluations would later cement this idea, likening Esti to the princess in the tower, passive, imprisoned, waiting for someone else to decide her fate. And then came the surgeries. Suddenly, Esti began to alter her appearance. She underwent multiple cosmetic surgeries, lip injections, nose reduction, a full facelift. Her transformation was stark and swift. Esti would later claim that Manfred pressured her into changing her looks, that he was the one who forced her under the knife. But her past suggested a different story. A woman desperately shaping herself to fit a man's desire, only to recoil when that identity proved hollow. Then came the final betrayal. The one, she said, made her sure Manfred had to die. He didn't want children. Manfred, who already had grown children from a previous relationship, told Esti he had no interest in starting over. No babies, no family. That, according to Esti, was the moment everything crystallized. On the night of November 21, 2010, Esti and Manfred returned home after an evening out. It was cold, quiet, the type of night that feels undisturbed until it isn't. Once Manfred drifted off to sleep, Esti got to work. This time, she was prepared. She lined the apartment's walls and floors with thick sheets of plastic, carefully covering every surface like a crime scene from a movie. She had learned from Holger's murder, the stench, the chaos, the improvisation. This time, it would be clean, controlled, precise. And she had practiced. In the months between the two murders, Esti had taken herself to a local shooting range. There she honed her aim, improving her precision, and familiarized herself with the same weapon she had used to kill Holger, a small .22 caliber Beretta. This wasn't the spur of the moment explosion of violence. This was calculated. Esti stood behind Manfred and fired 4 bullets into the back of his head. He died instantly. This time, she wasted no time. There was no panic, no second thoughts, no attempts to burn the body. With the same chainsaw she had used on Holger, she dismembered Manfred and methodically wrapped the pieces in plastic. She then encased each part in concrete, packed them into ice cube tubs, wheeled them down into Schlickerius' basement right next to Holger. 2 men, 2 murders, 2 sets of remains, all hidden in the very same freezer beneath her own business. But there was a complication this time. Manfred hadn't disappeared quietly. Her relatives were concerned. They called, they questioned, they pressured Esti for answers. So on November 26, Esti did something bold. She walked into a police station and reported him missing. She claimed Manfred had left her for a new lover in Thailand. A new chapter, a clean break. But the story felt flimsy. The timeline didn't add up. Still, there were no leads, no body, no witnesses. The investigation never picked up steam. Esti had gambled, and for the moment, she had won. And then life seemed to move on. That December, Esti had met yet another man. This time, things moved fast. She became pregnant 2 months along by the summer of 2011. A new relationship, a new life growing inside her. Had it ended there, we might have never known what Esti had done. But fate had other plans. On June 6, 2011, a water pipe burst inside her apartment building. Other residents, fed up with the leaks and water damage, called maintenance. Workers arrived, tools in hand, to locate and fix the source of the problem. That search led them to a padlocked basement storage unit. It wasn't officially registered to any tenant, but it was clearly in use. They broke the lock and stepped inside. What they found was nothing short of horrifying. Inside the room, the maintenance workers discovered multiple freezers, a handgun, and an overwhelming stench. They opened one of the concrete-filled tubs and found something impossible to mistake. A human leg, protruding grotesquely from the mix. The police were called immediately. Inside those freezers, investigators found what remained of 2 bodies, each male, both with gunshot wounds to the back of the head. One of the bodies was nearly complete. The other was mostly gone, reduced to a skull and scattered fragments. By the next morning, June 7th, word of the gruesome discovery had spread like wildfire. Esti, who was working at a shift at Schlickeria, overheard her customers gossiping. Someone said maybe Manfred had been found. Another joked about the freezer in the basement. Esti didn't laugh. She quietly left shift, cleared out all her bank accounts, grabbed her passport, bought a ticket to Paris. But when she arrived at the airport, she hesitated. She suspected police might be waiting, and she was right. Austrian authorities had already been alerted. Esti turned around and slipped into a taxi. Destination: Italy. She crossed the border and checked into a guest house in the quiet mountain town of Tolmezzo using a fake name. She kept her head down, but inside, the storm raged. She was anxious, emotional, unstable, unable to stay quiet. And that's when she met a street artist. For reasons still unclear, the artist took her in. Maybe he thought she was just another lost soul. Maybe she charmed him. But within days, Esti began unraveling. She rambled about the discovered bodies. She spent hours obsessively researching news reports on the case. She spoke of suicide. The artist grew uncomfortable. Something didn't feel right. He called the police. On June 10th, Esti was arrested in Udine by Italian authorities. She didn't resist. She was calm, possibly even relieved. That same day, forensic investigators confirmed that the partial remains in the freezers, mostly bones and skull, belonged to Manfred. On June 24, a court in Trieste approved her extradition. Esti was shackled, escorted to a waiting plane, and flown back to Austria, back to face justice. After her arrest in June 2011, Esti was placed into a pre-trial detention held in a secure psychiatric facility where prosecutors prepared the case would grip Austria and the entire German-speaking world for years to come. It was within the sterile walls of this institution that Esti would give birth to her child. On January 11, 2012, she delivered a baby boy, fathered by her most recent partner, who astonishingly stood by her through it all. Despite the headlines, despite the mounting evidence that Esti had wholly and methodically murdered and dismembered not one, but 2 of her former lovers, this man remained loyal. So loyal In fact, that on March 29, 2012, he married her inside the interrogation room. A moment, had it been fiction, would have seemed too surreal to believe. A wedding conducted beneath fluorescent lights, under the watchful eye of investigators, with shackles in the margins. Then came the trial. On November 19, 2012, Esti's trial began at the Vienna Regional Criminal Court. The public's appetite for every detail of the ice cream killer case was insatiable. The courtroom was packed. Journalists lined the benches, and every camera lens was fixated on the woman at the center of the horror. Esti pleaded guilty, without hesitation, without conditions. She confessed to both the murderers, Holger and Manfred. She called her own actions disgusting. She said she felt miserable about what she had done. But something was off. The courtroom noted it. The media noted it. Even the judge noted it. Her tone was flat, mechanical, robotic almost. There was no emotion behind the words, no tremble in her voice, no sign of grief or guilt in her expression. It felt hollow, rehearsed, performed. When questioned about this lack of apparent remorse, Esti blamed it on medication. She said the tranquilizer she had been prescribed left her emotionally numb, making it nearly impossible to access genuine feelings in front of others. Then, she took it a step further, arguing that she was deliberately suppressing emotion because any real show of sorrow would be dismissed as fake. I didn't want anyone to think I was acting, she said. So I just didn't show anything at all. It didn't matter. On November 22, 2012, just 3 days after the trial began, Esti was convicted of double homicide. The court handed down the harshest sentence available: life confinement in a secure psychiatric institution. She would not walk free again. The public's fascination, however, was just beginning. Esti's case dominated headlines across Austria, Germany, and Switzerland. She became a true crime obsession, gruesome, glamorous, grotesque. People were desperate to understand her, to study her, to talk to her. Some even wanted to be her. On March 20, 2013, her appeal was denied by the Vienna Court of Appeals. The life sentence stood. Then in November 2014, Esti published a memoir from within the institution, a bold and controversial retelling of her life, her loves, and her crimes. The book quickly became a bestseller, selling over 10,000 copies before the end of the year. Outrage followed. Families of the victims were furious. Critics denounced the book as exploitative. Esti's husband, still reeling from the media storm, was reportedly disgusted by the publication. Their marriage quickly fell apart, and they divorced not long after. But Esti wasn't done shocking the public. In November 2017, Esti was transferred out of the psychiatric institution into a full male prison. Yes, a male prison. Not because of gender identity, but because she was officially deemed too dangerous to be held in a standard women's facility. It was in this new prison she met Martin L. Martin was a violent offender, a man with a traumatic past and a long criminal record. Born into poverty and subjected to abuse throughout his childhood, Martin's path was marked by early violence. At just 17, he was convicted of attempted murder after stabbing a taxi driver during a robbery, even after the driver complied. Martin spent a decade behind bars. After his release, he spiraled again, this time into arson. Over a span of 18 months, he set fire across Lower Austria, a spree that ended in 2015 when he was captured and sentenced to another 5 years. In prison, Esti and Martin found each other. Their relationship grew rapidly, culminating in an engagement. For a while, it seemed Esti had found yet another partner to orbit. But just like all the others, this too crumbled. In July 2019, Esti abruptly ended their relationship, called off the wedding. The reason? Allegations emerged that Martin had been sharing child exploitation material with fellow inmates. No concrete proof was ever released. Martin denied it, but for Esti, the accusation alone was enough. She walked away. While incarcerated, Esti reportedly took up painting. One of her works, a self-portrait, captured attention. A quiet attempt at reflection, or just another performance. It's hard to stay. And that's where Esti's story for now ends. She remains imprisoned, declared by the courts to be one of Austria's most dangerous individuals. Her sentence is life without parole, and officials have made it clear she will never be released. The fear is too great, the risk too high, the psychology too rapt. And yet, despite everything, Esti continues to receive fan mail. Letters continue to pour in from people captivated by her story. Her image, her notoriety. She is infamous, iconic, a tabloid queen behind steel doors. For a long time, Esti used to say she regretted it all, that she would have just walked away, just left Holger, left Manfred, started fresh. But recently, that narrative changed. She began to embrace the attention. She flaunted media coverage, grinned at mentions of her name in the headlines. She reveled in the idea that people couldn't walk away. "Let them call me narcissistic," she said. And then, in a chilling moment of unfiltered honesty, Esti finally revealed her true motives. Not abuse, not trauma, not desperation, but greed. The fact that they died was the best solution for me, she said. When asked why she killed, why she chopped them up, why she stored them in freezers behind tubes of ice cream, Esti gave them the answer she had denied for years. "I didn't want them to pay back. I didn't want to share the business. It was all selfish. The abuse, whether true or not, was just an excuse." And that, perhaps, is the most terrifying part of her story. The murders weren't crimes of passion. They weren't acts of survival. They were, in her own words, calculated, cold, and convenient. A means to an end. And Esti, the princess once trapped in the tower, had no intention of ever being anyone's victim again. In the end, Esti's story is a haunting reminder of how darkness can hide behind charm and desperation. It forces us to question where the line is drawn between victim and villain, and whether anyone can truly escape the shadows of their past. What stays with me most is how power, control, and selfishness drove her actions, a chilling testament to how far someone can go when they believe the ends justify the means. It's a story that lingers long after the headlines fade. I appreciate you joining me today. Have an amazing weekend ahead. Until then, stay safe, crime enthusiasts.